Tene ta tano ngadu ke chala cerdo tanda ngaranso ke tambichu nyamsolembe ke kor la kor le ta tanda chitang ke tambichu chuchi gola hyupu ke cholta tambichu nyamsolembe ke chol tene tusam gomsam 세베게 솔다 엠발라 냠슬렘베 솔다 텐데 휴바레라 테니 다 데지슬라 다 단다 디나네 당아라서 베 칼바상보 다 제르도 조부송지 점된데 지 년투지 택바다 장주 셈베 택바다 송호 도지 택바데 넘버 솜도 송원은 제베게 나네 다 단다 나란소 디나니 믹살도 송호도 지티비 주념니 세베게 고갑이 깔바상부 히로 중앙에라 드니 준신 티처나 다 지당게 년투 티바다 드니 장주 셈베 티바티 샤르다 효라 냠니 세바마도 냠닝게 쪼오데 가리난게 요아레세노 송호도 지티비 냠니 난게 요아레 다데 사자가 주인이마 gelukang이나야 송호도 지티비 주에데 냠니 난게 요아레라 송호도 지티비 주에데 냠니 난게 촐테라 다 당보 민지제 왕 대지서 조지제 트레이 넘버 2단 덴베고니 냠슬링 그룹이 촐테 다 감더 바두 테이그나도 송요레 당하란스 젠치 바돌가 바르돌라 데네 당하란서 단다 다 지당 그 땡긴다마 세드 다 마음발라 자니 코르와게 동안 용 마거바 데네 랑힌 센진 통지라 펜토바 제 이용게 다 사와데 단다 루틴 디타인도 죽고바 임베처나 데네 송호도 지티비 추념니 세주데 갈침보레라 데네 데시아발라 데네 민지 당보로 민지 왕 데네 데지 스토지 제테이 토고바 임베처나 다 당보 감더 민지 왕 휴게 쏠데 정도.
This morning, we looked at the practice of Dharma in general, how we enter the gate of Dharma, and having done so, how we cultivate the stages of hearing, thinking, and meditating, and especially the practice of meditation, ideally cultivated in isolated retreat. We are particularly fortunate in the opportunity we have to practice the Buddha's teachings, and within them, the teachings of the Vajrayana. The Buddha taught several vehicles, the Shravakayana, the Bodhisattvayana, and the Vajrayana of secret mantra. Because we have the opportunity to practice that which is supreme among these, the Vajrayana, we are especially fortunate. Although we do some incidental practice of the Shravakayana and Bodhisattvayana, our principal practice, and this is true of any of the four traditions, Kagyu, Nyingma, Satya, and Gelug, our principal practice is the Vajrayana. The practice of Vajrayana requires, first of all, receiving the empowerments which ripen, and then the instructions which liberate. The point made at this point in our text is that since we have the opportunity in this interval, the interval between birth and death, the interval or bardo of this life, to accomplish our permanent welfare, our liberation and awakening, we need to do our best to do so. The most effective way to accomplish these things in this life is by making use of the Vajrayana teachings. In order to do this, we require both the ripening empowerment and liberating instructions. Therefore, our text now turns to how to receive these, and first of all, the ripening empowerments.
Tene ta teya ta chitang ka wang ko on se na jesun malari bi ke song na bombang godo to yo pa chi wang ronlu hakuru te pa nang wang seni detong te pa tan ji wang tende song yo re la tene teya ta chitang ka la me ga onze bomba ta dorma la so bang godo to yo ni tene chilap nang ge wa la ta de che sensi je ji wang re Tene ta nanga wanga onde se na, tene rang lu lakuru te pa nanga wang sun te la, tene rang lu te ta tanda tamal pe nambanda wote maimba. Tene ta tamal pe namba maimba, iram jala koi namba la gamne, tene iram jala koi namba gam, tene te la iram jala ngus jin chang. 다 텐데 시네 검난게 와라 tini te nanga wangte te ranga topa jila jiwarsi peke tap tap jayta tini senyi detong trepa tenji wang sundi tini senji nelu te tini jitanga ta ngaranso marapa wangte sena sente nangto karangi nyemang karangi tini nangto karangi tela namto tela rewa tang tokpa tang tini tela namto rakpa tini central ye medewa tini hedang kenzin chakdo ngajal la sopa namba na sopa tang denpa te re te yinaya te matang chubi onde sepa re tenji onde sena senji nelu te tini senji tangji la dewar hibi nimbo yuba indu tini senji nelu te ngo rang hingi tomba tang tomba ngo te yang ta sangji ji hinchar turunga ke tini sarcha yihi ji namba tang denpa ji yinba la te tardo ngo te ni te tardo yeba la ta rangi ngo su topa ina yo rong ngo su mato ni yinbar gamba ina yo rong te ta seni de tong ngo te pe go ni tenji on to ki yo re te tabu ge on kur te ta zo ta te la kandi ji go ge se na zo ta te je iram jala ko gamba ta sen de tong ngo la topa ji la ji pe on den ji ji la ji wa je ta kam dar teiga nang tu sona ya ondengi hi jilla chi pati pe kal chembure mato tene che sensi zeji onzang na tena te zamge tene gopa tong tendon rugu maari tene song yo re la ta te topa jilla chi wa ta kam dana la pe yo ne te lo pe naro pe hyab cham pon ne tene tapa la jab ne tene tigi jen chi topa jilla chi ne tene on cha sanga shanap dhabo topa te yendla tene penchin hirsinhage tene berozana la hindu go hiji nang ne di dala tene tene topa ngon chaba la soba ta tende chong yo re te tabu ge tene ondanji jilla ji ba je go re tende song yo re ta ondangi hijilla ji ba ten pe kal chebore re yin re te yin na ondangi hijilla ji ma tab na ya ta tingsang ka ka la wang mang bo nang ge yo re wang mang bo hyo ge yo re la tini te wang te hyu ba la ten ne ta rang sem te je dang bi chu la te pa dang ku ba to me ba ji na te pa to ku ba je wa te pa to ku ba ji ba ji na te pa to ku ba compel don ro tene te pa to ku ba compel don ro la ten ne tini ngarang ge dang bi chu nyam se len to ge nu pa dan silan da bo ya to ge wa re la tini te ta chi tang ge on ju ma phal ba zam hyu na te pen to me ba ten de ma re la te gu ba chim bo da ba re
With regard to the meaning of empowerment, Jetsun Milarepa said, the placing of the vase on one's head is the external empowerment. The pointing out of one's body as the body of the deity is the internal empowerment. And the pointing out of one's mind as bliss emptiness is the ultimate empowerment. What this means is that the external paraphernalia of an empowerment ceremony, the implements used, such as vases and so forth, and the use of these in the physical blessing or consecration of the disciples, is all external. What is internally going on in an empowerment is that the disciples are visualized as the deity, and the deity is invited and entered into them. This is done as a means of promoting realization. And ultimately, what the empowerment is concerned with is the nature of mind. Now, our minds, from our conventional and impure point of view, are quite afflicted. They're filled with suffering, thoughts of all kinds, and all manner of kleshas, such as attachment and aversion and bewilderment and jealousy and resentments of all kinds. This is true, but it is only true in the limited context of bewilderment, and these things are not true of the mind's nature. The mind's nature is emptiness, and that emptiness is itself the wisdom that is the innate capacity for the qualities of all Buddhas. To realize this, or even to consider this, is to understand the ultimate meaning of empowerment. Now, the point made at this part of the text is that in receiving an empowerment, what is of the greatest or primary importance is that the wisdom of the empowerment be born within your mind. The mere placement on your body of the external implements of the empowerment is not that important and is by itself not of great significance. In order to illustrate this point, reference is made to two events. One is when Lord Tilopa hit Naropa on the head with his sandal and thereby transmitted to him in essence the meaning of all empowerments. And similarly, when the Vijayadhara Sri Singha handed the translator Varochana an apple, and by doing so transmitted the ultimate lineage to him. The point being made is that it is the wisdom of empowerment generated by the disciple that makes the empowerment ceremony successful. This is important, but nevertheless, even if you do not give rise to the ultimate wisdom of empowerment during the ceremony itself, you should not think that receiving the empowerment is ineffective or meaningless. This is important for us to understand, as nowadays we receive many empowerments. If during an empowerment ceremony there is an increase in your faith and devotion, if before receiving the empowerment you lacked it and then you come to have it, or if you already approach the empowerment with faith and your faith increases, this in itself is a sufficient result, because it is this increase of faith and devotion that empowers and consecrates your practice. So therefore, in spite of the importance of the ultimate wisdom of empowerment, we should not denigrate the importance of ordinary empowerment ceremonies.
Tene ta teacher na ta rangla onden ji yihi jilla ji na yo rong machi na yo rong te ndor na ta ngaran so on hyo kapsula je sen no ing on to horne tene no to ma rakpa nyemon batan chone on hyo ma imba de zi rang sem te rang da bo ya bo je ja tene tela wang kan de je hyo na ya 당보 왕휴 값을라 드네 다 잡순 로와도 종주조도 샘께봐 미파시봐 요래라 드네 디 값을라 근주 솜당 자와 솜랑 문이 잡순 로와인 디처들라 온휴와도 온휴게 쳇들라 잡순 로와인 솜베게 드네 잠주게 근홍도 미파 대전도 드니 종주조도 생기be 값을라야 다제 그뭐 냠바 렌셈도 터도 그거네 온효한다고다 야 남도 라바다가 세 남도 강조만중제네 온효와라소바다 텔라 다제 깝깔리 효나야 희그마리티 이나야 대 남도 냠베가 온도 마당와제네 랑기 셈데 랑기 다고야보지 잡네 드니 마준로 남긴 타동냠 생진통지 tenen deba dewande jo dewi jo gewa drup mi hiba mendeba dunga mende jo dunga ji jo dipa mi gewa pang mi hiba la tene senjin teno dewa mathopa dunga ta demba yungi yo rela te ta nom dunga le tolwa ta dewa la ngapa te cherdo la ta ngarang ki tambi chu nyans lingu ge pa cheita tambi chu chi nani jo song doji ti chu nyans lingu ge pa cheita song doji ti chu nyans lembe ge cherdo la tini wang seng ge yin sambe kong number to pa song ju jo de sen che pa ta dem ba ta ti ka sala na tini tamro ta sen ji ungi wa la ti tamro to sen ji mi pa che tene te yendo te jesla ta rang lu de ta pa tene iram jala kor gongi ware tene chitang on de sena late phal chewa ta chulu yenda do je na late ndundu ya ba ta gongi ware re la Te re te yin yang song ha doji tipi ka lo la lan dan to gomba ti zo ma yin pa la doji ka namba la gomba ti zo nang ge yo re la tini te la doji ka namba la zo gomba te la gu ba tu jun sin kari yo re se na ta che se na su su ji wu song lo tang de ta ngarang lu de la ma re la ma yin ba te la yin ba la gom na yiram je la yin ba la gom na ti kari pheng re gu ba kari yo re sam ba ro che se ge re te yin yang ngarang su ge yiram je la ko gom ge yo re la yiram je la ko gomba te daji ka namba la gom ge yo re daji ka namba la gomba te tene ma yin ba te la yin som ne gomba ma yin pa ta ngarang su ge sen je ne lu de dewar ki be nimbo ye de man ne sen je tang ji je la ye pa te ngan de chur ba ti ge dewar ki be nimbu ge rongzu te ta tanda ngarang su ge ma ra ba no hyar ge yo re te yin na yo ne lu go on de se na yidam je la ye ko do yer me pa je yin ba re la tene te yin ba la yin bar gom ne ta ngarang ge lu de ma da pa tene juli khara le trup phumbo ngai rang hin de chur ba je ma yin ba ta ba yi hi je rongzu yidam je la ye ko yin sam ba ten de gom tene te la ya ta ngarang so te si hemba da bu ma da be hemba de yung re la te yung char to tene salve ge char to tene rang ne som la ye gen ro som gom ne tene te le we jin tru pa la so ba ta on chu so su ge mi pa ta de se ne tene yiram ja la ngu su chin ta ne rang te bi tene yiram ja la ye ku sum to rang lu ngo ye so yer mi den de ne sha to chung som be mi pa ten zo ta kan sar sal sem je na min ke on do ma hyur ve tap
Whether you give rise to the ultimate wisdom of the empowerment or not, it is important when receiving an empowerment not to approach it in a state of distraction, not to allow your mind to run wild with pleasures, but to receive the empowerment having taken hold of your mind and directing it as much as possible at the empowerment ceremony. Empowerments always begin with a renewal of the vow of refuge and a further generation of bodhicitta. When you renew the vow of refuge at the beginning of an empowerment, do so consciously with the thought, in taking this empowerment, I am further going for refuge to the three jewels and the three roots. And when you generate bodhicitta at the beginning of the empowerment ceremony, reflect upon your motivation for receiving the empowerment. Dispense with any negative or neutral motivation that may be present, and again, not allowing your mind to run wild, reflect upon the fact that all beings want to be happy and want not to suffer. But generally speaking, beings are unaware of what actions constitute causes of happiness and which actions constitute causes of suffering. Through lacking this knowledge, beings bring about their own suffering and destroy their own happiness by making the wrong choices of action. So your motivation in receiving the empowerment is the thought, in order that I can cause all of these beings to enjoy the happiness and freedom from suffering for which they aspire, I will practice Dharma, and in particular the Vajrayana. In order to do so, I will receive this empowerment. Having in that way generated bodhicitta, next you visualize your body as the form of the particular deity of that empowerment. Now this brings up the fundamental issue of self-generation or self-visualization, the practice in Vajrayana where we visualize ourselves as deities. This is somewhat unconventional by the standard of most religious traditions. As we know, in most religions, where there are deities, they are visualized or considered to be external. If they are imagined in front of the practitioner. And yet, in Vajrayana Buddhism, we visualize ourselves as deities. You might reasonably ask why we do this. You might say, but I am not a deity. What good is it going to do me to pretend to be someone other than I am? Well, in fact, you are not pretending anything when you visualize yourself as a deity, because your nature, your true nature, is Buddha nature, and the deity is merely an embodiment of that. Your nature, your true nature, is always concealed from you as long as you are subject to bewilderment. So in order that you transcend that concealment or obscuration, you visualize yourself as a deity who is recognized by you to be the embodiment of that wisdom that is your own fundamental nature. In that way, you let go, as much as possible, of your conventional fixation upon your impure aggregates of flesh and blood, and so forth. Because there will still be some remaining clinging to conventional perception, you will usually, in most empowerments, further visualize 3 syllables at the 3 places, and the rays of light that are produced by these syllables will invite the actual deity who dissolves into you, generating further confidence that you actually are the deity. In short, during the empowerment ceremony, you try as much as possible to direct your attention to the stages of empowerment and to be free from distraction.
Tene ta te yendo la wang xiu gap sa la yang go gui wang dang song go wang dang tu ji wang la so ba ta de la je wezir tro du ge nam ban da bo ta wezir tru ne rang la tembe ge nam ba ta bu ge ta je rang la ngo so yiram je la ye chen la top yo som be ge mi pa ta yi chi da bu je go ge yo re la te tar to gom ne te ni wang xiu ge mi pa se tene 잡선 로와동 송준조도 센지 바지나 tene je jitang ge ondang ge hi je la ji pa ti pe che par tam pa re te yin ya ta ne ka te ta bu ge kal ba ta me din ba ta bu je yin ya te on zom ju ba la be chen la che par tam pa tho ge yo re la te ti cher na on je te kal che bo je ta tene te gu pa tam pa je re je 다 니바가 온도 세나 온휴 값을라 되니 값갈라양 값갈라 다 미게 도바신 기텔라 온라 담직만 부요래 되니 담직대 성마도 나 되니 녀송랑 도그래 생긴다 보다 된대야 값갈라 되니 다 라마지신 제버던 법안는지 성요래 데 카리리세나 되니 다 되게 제 게딕 론도르 야포지시 담비주님네 야포지 나오게 제들래 perna lama gewi hinin chi lengin de karire se na loma ti chu le yapo ji tsai to bache loma ti chu yapo ji drop to bache loma ti chu de tene tarsim bache se ju te ta lama ge gain da bache la tin gain de drop ge cher da la tene ta chiran so on hyo ni tene tamsik pe nengo chimbo yore te ma song na pe nyenka te si yore suana hi song yore te yin ya on hyuba la te ne ta chla tang pen yung gre ma do on hyuba la te ne so do long ro ya ji za ne on se ge yo ma re ta jala kal te je lota da tene ge di long dur za ne nyam ne ma je ba la ne ma je ba lota ji ta tin den da bo je yin nan di ba me ge wa chap chen bo so tende se nan nge song do long gre ba ma to yin on hyuba la te ne nge song do long se ki te za ne ma si pan da bo je la teacher na ta tamsik sinkin te kanri jin song gu yo re se na ta jitang tam chai se du ta sanskrit ke la samaya se ge yo re la te pe ki de jur ka so la tam chai sung ge yo re la ti tamsik te kanri je la ko ge yo re se na tende ge pe nyang kha chen bo chin long song nge song do long dong do ji nya wala long dong kin tende yo ma re la wona kari yo re se na tam cha se du te la ta ngarang ge tang bo tang bi chu ji du ge yin so ni chu go le hyu pare tini te nrup to ba je ta ngaran chu tam bi chu ji go le hyu pa cham mai ba de mi mai ba je chu de te si nyam ni si to ba je kal che ge yo re la te kal che ge on ki ta ngarang ge chu nda on da ta ba ji nyam ni che ge yin so ni ke len ki tam cha tini tam cha wa te na te ya je nyen kha chin da bu tin de kha ya ma re tam cha wa te gu ba khan di ki che do re se na tam cha te che ya pu che drup thop na tam che ba te gu ba yo re 제 담지 제 대단히 라니 마제나 대 담자와들 고바히라 자요 말해라 든 준신 티처나 담자에게 차이대 라니라이 야포 제 깔트바지 시에나 되네 대 고바당 담바당 팽야당 담바인 베잖아 담차이 시도 당하랑 그 휴기 추년이 제기 생긴 대 다가세 책점만 바다 제 나랑 그 담지에 바현들지 라니라 따르트바지 대문에 다 라닝게 때문에 갈체게 요래라 대답에 다 담식대 다 송구그르베스는 송구게 요래 마도 되냐 담식 생긴데 벤적스로 내손을 롱초초라고 된데 가요 말이라 티처나 다 지당게 왕효 Tomsik song, Tinde Siena, Tinite, Gubaton Pen, Chimboton Temba in the Cherna, Miji Wang, Sigiore.
The main body of most empowerments will be divided into several sections, usually corresponding to body, speech, and mind, and so forth. During the empowerment ceremony, there will be various visualizations that convey the actual empowerments to you, such as the emanation and dissolution of rays of light, the rays of light dissolving into you, and so on. During the empowerment ceremony, what is of greatest importance is that you engage in these visualizations with an attitude of trust and confidence that you are actually receiving the empowerments and blessings that these depict or represent. Now, again, in the best circumstances, if you can generate the ultimate wisdom of empowerment, of course, that's wondrous. But even when that's not possible, it is still useful to receive an empowerment, especially if you do so consciously, with the conscious intention to direct your mind to the empowerment ceremony. Now, there is another issue connected with empowerments, however, that is of great concern to many people, which is samaya. Many people wonder whether it's good to receive empowerments at all, because each empowerment seems to come with samayas or commitments, and are these not a source of great danger to those who are unable to keep them? The presentation of samaya, of the commitments connected with empowerments, as very, very strict and very dangerous, is a tool. It is presented that way in order to encourage practitioners to engage in virtue. To understand why this is done, you must remember the primary responsibility of a guru is to, one way or another, get you to do the right thing. In order to do that, they will sometimes say, having received this empowerment, you are bound by such and such samaya, and should you transgress it, you will be in great peril. Their presenting it this way is done in order to get you to do the right thing. But you should not think that having received empowerment places you in peril. Having received empowerment is always a source of benefit. Now, if someone having received empowerment, utterly repudiate the entire thing, generate intense antipathy for the whole process and tradition, and in reaction against it, to consciously engage in a complete reversal of virtue and wrongdoing and do everything they could wrong, well, obviously, under those circumstances, that person might fall to lower rebirth. But you are not going to fall to a lower rebirth simply because you receive an empowerment and thereafter can't do everything perfectly. To understand this, it may help to consider the word samaya, which was translated into Tibetan as damtsik, which means words of promise or words of bond. Now, the idea of words of bond or words of promise is not the idea that if you transgress these rules or regulations, you will in an instant fall fast and straight to Vajra hell after your death. The point is simply that having received empowerment, having received instruction, the point of it is to practice. If we don't actually practice, simply receiving empowerment is insufficient. Now, as we've seen, one of the things that keeps practice going is the momentum of commitment. So if you make a commitment when you receive empowerment to practice, the momentum and force of that commitment will enable you to do so. In that case, the words of commitment or words of promise that you uttered during the empowerment have actually been a source of great help or assistance to you. If you don't practice having received empowerment, then it's not that you're going to fall to lower states, it's simply that the promise didn't really fulfill its function, because it didn't produce a momentum of commitment and therefore practice. So samaya should be regarded as more of a useful tool than a threat. The purpose of it is to give us the means to establish a momentum of diligent practice. And this is established because we approach the empowerment with that attitude of enthusiastic commitment. If you ask, well, do you need to keep samaya? Well, you do need to keep samaya because you need to keep your promises, but you should not keep them out of fear. And that is a bit about the empowerments which ripen.
Tene ta te tabu ge wang te hyo ne tene ta te jesu la torzi ji te tamba dangwa de la tene te la dangwa tenzo tene wang hyo na ta te rang sem ji je te membership ge tab tab indu te la ta te jesu la dangwa hyo gu ge la dangwa tenzo ta dangwa nyamsul lempe ka sala khandi sini nyamsul ne gu ge ye pa tene ka gam gu ge ye pa ta tenzo Rinpoche la dangwa te hyo gu ge la tene ti dangwa hyo pa te ya ta tanda kap na la te ge nang to so na hyo lo to thulu nam dong cham ji song ne ta che nga hyo chale yin ta dai song sam ban da bo ma yin pa hyo pa te zo ta la ne la tar ka sala ka se tar tu tu je ta pe che par chen ji tar tu na chen ru che par chen ji ji tu na che par chen re la te ta bo ma ju na yo ka se tu tu je la ni che ju te ta ni dangwa ti hyo pa yin sam ne yu ya ban da bo ma yin pa ni dangwa tin de ji ko song sam ne yu ya ban da bo ma yin pa ta ti zo dangwa hyo gu gi yo re la hyo gu bi jun sin te kan de se na la ni tar we gi che tu la dangwa ti hyo gi yo re la te ka se tu tu je tu jun do sen je de ne ma ji ba te kal che gi yo re te de sun re la te ni ta te kal che du te la te ne rap tu chang na ta tu to hi hin tu na yin gam to ni mo me na yin si ni mo ba ta ni mo ba te si hyo chong tu song wa da bo ta te de kal che gi yo re tene kam dana la tanda tiga nang tu song na tene jay ta naro chu tu shaja chenpo gamba gongza tang tene tegin tu zoba chenpo chek che tong tegal ga tene tingyan zeng gamba gongza tenzo tene ta tenzo la pe zendru yakbo tupa tene nyamne yakbo tupa tene chong na tene ta tela ngone ta jibi chenpo tende ngari ya chenpa re la tene ta te tar to ngarang tsu ki nyong ling chen tu chakpo chi tot na da njong tu njong re la kam dana la song na tene rap te drundik nong kha la drolwa tabu pe song tene drol la ndapa jab na tene drol jin ndapa te ndapa jab ne nong kha la yu kha na tene nong kha ne korang ndapa kali hei ne korang sala ndapa me pa lew re pe te yendo tene topa chepar chi jila chi ne ta te la chal to tene topa chepar chi jila chi pa tene chi vi chenpo ta tanda tene chen yo re sunga ta pa chay tang ta te ta pa ma jun na ya ndrain te khande chi re se na tso la kawa pa pa ta pa sam tene tso la kawa pa na kawa pa so ten kawa pa long sung tena hyo koran rangin ki yal drog yo re la pe te yendo nyong to pa chepar chi jila chi na nong to to nyam pa tong chi rangin ki hye ni drebu to pa ta tene song yo re tene te yendo rap chi taman rabo chi yin na yo choram cho la hyo ta pa se choram cho kali hyo ni tene tar chapa ma lu pa hyo ni cho yi rongin ton jon ro yendo ta tene ngar chenpe ke on se na tene telo tang naropa tang tene ta zopa chenpe ke nanjurpa yi on se na garab doje tang her sinha tang nyang ting zing zongpo la sopa ta tene njalu la pepa chepar jen tende namba mampo chen yo re la tene te tar to tene rang zendu chepar jen gug re tene ta tende song yo re la ta te tabu topa te top na pe karwa zangpo re yina ya te tabu te ma top na ya tene pe tab dupo ta chu nyausalin ma top kiri we se na ma re ngaran tsuku chu ka se tutu chi nyamni se pa te pe karwa zangpo re la tene ta ti ge cher na te ngaran tsuku ta te zendu rap ti tang top na ya che par tang pa pa re la zendu rap ti tang ma top na ya ta ngaran ge sen chi tene tang pi chu de ma ji pa che ke nyamni che na ta ti ge pen pa te maung pa la ren ji po cha zang po je la ji ne rang kin sen chi tang je la pen pe jor ro ge wa re
Having received empowerment, the next step is to receive the instructions which liberate. The function of empowerment is to ripen one's mind or one's being. The subsequent function of instruction is to provide one with the information one needs in order to actually practice. So the instruction concerns practice, how to practice, what to meditate on, and so on. The point made at this part of the text is we should never consider instruction, simply receiving instruction, to be sufficient. We should never develop the attitude that thinks, well, I've received such and such instruction, having received it is enough. Because the point of instruction is to enable you to practice. Having received instruction, you should therefore practice as much as you can. Obviously, the more practice, the more exertion, the better. But the point is not how much you practice, but that you use the instructions you've received practically to practice. Because if instruction is not used in this way, it is not performing its function. With regard to the results of learning and practice, traditionally it is said, the sign of having heard the teachings is to be tame and subdued. The sign of having meditated on them is to have no kleshas. This means that under the best circumstances, those who practice the various traditions with the utmost diligence, that is to say, diligent practitioners of the 6 dharmas of Naropa or the Mahamudra, or diligent practitioners of the breakthrough and leap over disciplines of the Great Perfection, can achieve, through their exertion, have achieved in the past and continue to do so nowadays, the state of complete liberation. This means that the best of the best practitioners achieve a state of mind that is like a snake untying its own knots. It is irrelevant if a snake is tied into a knot because it can untie itself effortlessly. In the same way, for those who achieve this state of awareness, the arising of thought is irrelevant. If not, then the intermediate among the best achieve a state of mind that is like snowflakes dissolving into the surface of a lake. As soon as the flakes hit the surface of the water, they melt. In the same way, for these individuals, because of their experience and realization, thoughts dissolve in recognition as they arise. And then those who are the least among the best achieve a state of realization that is like the melting of ice, where gradually the rigidity of thought melts into the fluid quality of wisdom. In any case, those with the greatest diligence will achieve the same states of realization as the renowned practitioners of the past, the great siddhas like Telopa and Naropa from the Mahamudra tradition, or Garab Dorje, Shri Singha, Yangben Tenzin Zangpo, and others who achieved the rainbow body from the Great Perfection tradition. Through the greatest diligence, one will achieve the greatest result. But however much or little you practice, you are fortunate to have the opportunity to do so. Because if you practice with the utmost exertion, you will achieve the utmost realization in this very life. But if you practice with less exertion, while this realization will still occur gradually and over a longer period of time, the habit of your involvement in practice will ensure that your mind will gradually be transformed.
Tene ta teishendo ta te tabu ta lama cheparchi jibu cheparchi te tabu je majung na ya tene ta kapndana la triganando sungdu te la ranchong nomin dang nyomle je ondo masong wa sonre la ta tende je ngaran su su ji o tamalpa pe cheparchi njong kaware te kawa ina ya ta khande gogre se na nomin takpa yeni teni takpa sem yen lunga ye som yeni depata bata teni lelo jang jang se depata ba mai pa nyomlin che nguye ta ngaran so nyomlin kare se ge yo na ya teni shaje chimbo gong ge yo na ya nda zogo chimbo gong ge yo na ya nda ta tela che gomne teni ta teya ta ngaraso rinpakinto la tanda shaolin targi yore la teni tangpo ngunro ni zangte teni tangpo Tomong Gangando number ya, then they chew the lot choose and roll chetula. Tangaransu send the young Tabaji Chula, Jupi chetula, the Tanjuri never go out on Chiwa Motabat legend, Corvini Migamba Tenzoi, Isla, Somno Yaputi Tani, Tangaranguni, Tampichu, Yan Tabaji Dugu and do, some big Lord J. Yapo, Jella Jail, Jewik Tap, La de Tambo Tomong number yet gum. Tini Tomong number yet Tambola in Gongu Yorella, Yan Kapka Langaranso, Chunium Nancy Pecapsula Tesi, Lilo Cherundro and Rabota, Debatomu Chondundro and Rabota, Chudundega Lote, Tatela, Chondundro and Rabota, Tindechum Capsula, Tiniti, not on the Tomo Yapa, Tati Chitanga, Lodo number yes, do Muni getting around Chu Madu Tamiti. Tombi Chu Yamni Maziba Tame by the Aransu Missiten Jongor. Te Yapa, te Yapa, Sono Yapo, Tani, Titanda de Yapote, Rang Sana Yang Cortona, Tintitanda de Sana Train to me, Rang Sente, Rangi Chula, Zetabachi Yungi Orella, Teacher na, Tate, Narang Tagasi, Zembosin is the Bandabuti, Maimpa, Narang Gupata, Paint into Yapote, Somni, Sente, Tombi Chula, Zipa, Lo Chusun Dorsipe, Tabi in the Cherna, Tambong Tumong Nundro, Dodo number Yibo Gambata. Teni te jesu la tumo ma impe ngandro ta tenzo jai tepa ta mugun pelwa rang nyemo ba to dip jangwe ki cherta teni te yendo senam ji tsum pelwe ki cherta teni la me chela jelang jup ki cherte ta te la tumo ma impe ngandro yibo tenzo nyamni nangu yo are la teni te la teni nyamni nang ki devanda bote yang yung yo are teni teacher na tumo ma impe ngandro tenzo nyamni che teni tita ini ta zo kang kal chegi yore se na jai semte la ngaransu ke semte chitang ta nong to raba chegi yore nong to raba mambu chegi yore la nong to raba mambu che na teni semte tambe chula te tsam juk matu pata bu che ta teni nong to rakpa mambu che we kapsul la ya teni zo kari chegi yore se na nong to yakbo ta nong to dubo namba na so ba cheji yore te ina yang ngaransu la te che nyamba la kamso yin bo onke nong to do ate mambu chegi ya ba che nong to yakbo te tsam che matu panda bo che ta te yungi yore thoma me pa de kambe pa chang nyamba la te che teni te yendo la nong to khahi pe chipo ndabo ta gabo ndabo che ta nong to khahi che semchi ndabo ta yi me dewa ta teni ta semba chowa ndabo ta jito ndabo tende yungi yore la teni tini gi no ne khande che gi do te na che semba ti chowa ta madewa ta toba ndabo che tende gi nong to de mambo che che ne ngarang chipo tang to ma chuba ta si temi gi nong to temi gi toba temi gi rewa mambo che se ne gupa me ba ta tende yungi yore la teni teacher na ta te ta bu nong to ngemba ti hewe gi cher la kandi gogre se na teni hini chi tingen sen gam te chi ngarang ge sente ngarang ge dapo ja tremba ta hi hin te ne teni nong to ngemba ten zo ta nong to rakwa ten zo ta nyemo ba ten zo te si her jo na teni rang ge sente rang ge dapo pho ne rem ji sem hiwa ta le pa ta teni sem che kulhong nong to dapo je yin na yo nong to ngemba ten zo nyong do ro ta nong to zombo ten zo mang do ro ta te ta ba je yin ba te la te ni rang ge sem ji chorwa la ya ta che chorwa du bo ten zo te si chong do ro ta chorwa ji bo ten zo ya mang do ro ta ta ten de yong ge yo re la jun sin teacher na hine ji tingen za na ka se tu tu do gom je ta kal che wa yin sa.
Even if you do not practice with so much exertion that you become in this life like those holy beings of the past, it is important, as our text reminds us, that we not allow ourselves to remain in a state of constant mindless distraction and utter indolence. This means that we need to practice in an orderly and proper manner. Whether what we practice is principally the Mahamudra tradition or the tradition of the Great Perfection, In either case, we need to practice these traditions in their sequence and order. We have to start with the preliminaries, and among them, with the common preliminaries, because these are the means by which we can turn our minds to the Dharma. Through contemplation of the difficulty of acquisition of the freedoms and resources of this precious human body, and through contemplation of death and impermanence, of the results of actions, and of the defects of samsara, through these four contemplations, we come to understand in the beginning why we need to practice. So they're important in the beginning, but they are not only important in the beginning, because from time to time we will face the obstacle of increasing laziness, decreasing faith and devotion and enthusiasm. And whenever we find ourselves in that situation, these contemplations can help us, because they remind us of why we are practicing Dharma, and why indeed we must practice Dharma. So the function of these contemplations is to bring one's own mind to the Dharma, not by an effort of will or by force, but through the application of reason. Having contemplated these, one then goes on to engage in the four uncommon preliminaries. And the fundamental purpose of these is to increase one's faith and devotion, to purify obscurations and wrongdoing, to gather the accumulations of merit and wisdom, and to receive the blessing of one's Guru. And these are very significant, as it is these conditions which lead one to the result of practice. Having performed these practices, one then has to work directly with one's own mind. Normally, your mind is quite disturbed. Our minds are always producing all sorts of very intense and disturbing thoughts. And these intense and disturbing thoughts prevent us from practicing Dharma. Some of these thoughts we consider good because they're pleasant. Others we consider bad because they're unpleasant. And even though, in a sense, both have to be dealt with, it is the bad ones that pose us more of a problem in the beginning, because they disturb us and afflict us so much. Unfortunately, we have more of a habit, or a stronger habit, of engaging in negative thinking than we do of engaging in positive thinking, because most of the habits that we've accumulated throughout beginningless samsara are somewhat negative. We do have from time to time some pleasant or pleasurable thoughts, thoughts of pleasant excitement and so on. But far more common than these are thoughts of worry, thoughts of anxiety, obsessive thoughts of all kinds, thoughts of sadness, generally states of misery of one kind or another. We always seem to have more of these going through our minds at any given moment. Essentially, since these thoughts are unnecessary, what their existence means is that through these thoughts, we are preventing our own happiness. The solution to this is to cultivate the fundamental meditation practice of tranquility, or shine. By doing so, you take possession of your own mind. You cultivate the faculties of mindfulness and alertness that give you the ability to choose thoughts. As a result, your mind starts to relax, and as it does so, these negative thoughts occur less and less often, allowing natural states of well-being, positive thoughts, and so forth, to take their proper place and perform their proper function. What this means is you become less miserable and you feel better, which is important.
Tene ta tela yang ta tanda zo ta de de ji sula ta long tong ge nyam ni la long tong ge nyam ni la ta chwa ji chim bo zo ba chim bo kan de ji nyam ni chen ya ta kam dana la thi ge nang to som na tap de wa ta nyam ni to pa da bo la tene zo simu nyam ni to malam tong we sa bo so mi tene chemo ngaran zo chitang ge ta tu rang namba jen da la je san la tremba ta hi hin ten ta tremba se na je ngarang ge sem te la nam to rakpa ta nam to nyamba tende ge on to ma hyoro wa ji gu sambate tu jen do tremba ge tene tremba ge ten to ba je ten tremba de yo na tene semte tanda higinte yungi yorela tin semka kare chegedo kare somgedo yabu chegemendo tin aranchu hakwa na hingi yore junsin teacher na jasi hyo lag sauna samsung de pa non na temba tan higinto so la pap chung sung hi ji da ne tetar thalmo jorsi tin jasi hyo la khong thalmo jarni be kal chembore kal chembo imbichina khong thalmo jarni hyoyin Thalmo jarni kya de karire sena charanso sem songni ta gomja somkin tenju ge nengo chehyu rabo tel kare gogre sena tene tempa ta hihini bote yabo je tengu gre te tempa te katu yina ya malapa je topna tene hihin te yungi yorela junsin teacher na tempa ta ne hihin to sola pa jonsong ki je se te kale takpa tu jundula te kal chembo ji se gogre somna ta tende ge labja na rela tini te tabu go ni ta che ngaranso sem de dabu jab ni tini tanda tiga nando sona go som tamal chunjam su ma hiro wasi ta perna sem ga ondo se na sem nang to gi jisu nang to rakpa gi jisu nang to rakpa che ne tini pa nima de zo so wan rabo che tende gi truba chang chang la nyemo chang chang ta nang to chang chang gi jisu hyor so wan rabo ma impa tene luge cheba ina ya ta ka ka la ngaran sun ji ting le ka si go gele te ina ya te mi ga tene je on ma son wan da bo che ta no ina ya te ta bo ta che tang ke cha tan tan tempa go pa tan tempa tende hi go gele te ina ya ta te mi ga che ngan chao namba na tso be ge nom ton tro ge jin da nye mo ba che ge jon da bo tende la te si te hi pa ye te ne ta te je so ma hyor wa che go gele ta tende song rang sem te rang dapo jab rang lu de rang dapo jab rang ngo te rang dapo jab ni dapo jab gu bi jun sin de kan de se na te tra se jeng de pan dapo mai ba ta ngarang la phem bi gi che to ngarang lu ma ye som te dapo rapo che jab ne tam bi chu la kol gu pa yin bi cherna te ta bi che se ne te hi te ne kan de si gu ge ore se na simu ka so la mlam dong ve so ta kam de na so yo re la de mlam ngo hi ta mlam ngo hi na de che se mai ba de nam mlam ten zo la ya te mlam yin ba la hi ba ta mlam tong ni yin ba la hi ba la so ba tap ta te ta la so mo ta teni ya ka la mlam ma mi na ya we sa ta tang bo ni ru ka sa la ya te che sem ti nong chan da bo kan de kha ge do ta ne we sa teni thun sam tham che do julu to bardo teni teng sam parta la te chu ton ji juma to mlam ta ba yin sam ba da bo che ta teni bardo ge no wan da bo chi tang ge bardo la pembe ge kong da bo ta tende chang teni teng jing gon ju nam so la ma yi ram ji che de se ta teng kap ka la teng dam tende che du teni la ma ya na la mi ge nan jur la gam ni la ma la surwa ta ya na yi ram je la yi ko gam ni yi ram je la yi che rem ta de pa sa teni la ma la son de se jo la ngo wa to ma nam ya po ji se ni teni ta ta da teni ya po je rang sem te tu jondo tene truba janjam ga ondum truba janjam sen truba ji truba tene tanu hyoki ni gonda ga parto la sen no inga ondu hyors wanda bo mai ba te se ka ka la temba ta hi hin te ne tene za je jute pe kal che gi wara re ta tende so wara la ondu ma hyoro wa che kal che gi re ta tende so wara la tene guso bardo woman nam ji nyamne tam ji ta bardo chiga dungal ji bardo singin da ta tenzo rimba yen do ngarang sen la yani yond kamri se jute nenden do se jute kal chembore tende so
After one has cultivated the state of tranquility, one gets to the principal practice, which is the insight or Vipashyana. And this means the main practices of either the Mahamudra or Great Perfection tradition. The essence, again, of this practice, according to our text, is to constantly cultivate the faculties of mindfulness or recollection and alertness. And these are focused in slightly different ways under different circumstances. Through these varied focuses, one ensures that one's life is not an unbroken continuity of meaningless bewilderment. For example, at night, one focuses one's mind on the practices of dream and the clear light. One uses the faculties of mindfulness and alertness consciously, and one starts with the cultivation of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness literally means recollection or memory, and it refers in meditation to the recollection of one's intention, that intention being not to allow one's mind to come under the power of thinking, especially negative thinking. The momentum of this recollected intention is protected and maintained by the second faculty, alertness. Now, alertness arises when mindfulness is present. Alertness refers to the mind's capacity to alertly recognize what is going on within that mind. It is this that allows one to maintain the faculty of mindfulness. With regard to the importance of these, Shantideva wrote, "I join my palms in sincere appreciation of those who knowingly cultivate the dual faculty of mindfulness and alertness, even at the cost of their lives, in the recognition that this is the only way to achieve stability of mind." In order to make the point of how important these two faculties are, Shantideva says that he bows to or joins his palms to those who cultivate these. In short, what we need to do is take possession of our minds. Taking possession of your mind means not allowing your three gates, your body, speech, or mind, to wander aimlessly and endlessly in an unbroken continuity of utter bewilderment. It's called a continuity because the way bewilderment works is that one moment or state of bewilderment, one thought, leads to the next one. And if one doesn't do anything to counteract this continuity or process, it will continue of itself indefinitely. With regard to the body, there are things we need to do. For example, we need to work and so forth. But there's also a lot of stuff that we do with our bodies that is pointless and aimless and that can be avoided. The same is true of speech. We need to use the faculty of speech appropriately. There are things that need to be said and so on. But we don't need to blather on endlessly and unnecessarily. So in that way, we need to take possession of and gain control of our body, our speech, and especially our minds. But this control is not for the sake of control. One needs to control these three faculties so that one can use them appropriately. As for how you do this, as was mentioned a few minutes ago, you apply the faculties of mindfulness and alertness at night through the dual practices of dream and clear light. Dream practice fundamentally consists of, first of all, gaining the facility in lucid dreaming, knowing that you are dreaming while you are dreaming, and so on. And then employing this facility or faculty in various ways, such as in recognizing the emptiness of dreams, and so on. As well, either ensuing upon that practice or in some cases before that practice has been stabilized, one can meditate on the clear light of sleep, either while going to sleep or in between dreams, and so on. In essence, this consists of looking at the mind within these states. Then our text advises us to conduct post-meditation during the waking state using the practices of the illusory body and the Bardo. Essentially, this consists of one's outlook toward phenomena and maintaining a recollection of the stages of the Bardo, which will be explained later on. And during the actual practice session, principally, one meditates upon the Guru and the Yidam, visualizing them and reciting supplications and mantras and so forth as appropriate. And at the end of every session, one dedicates the virtue to the awakening of all beings. The point of having different focuses of mindfulness and alertness to be applied to different situations throughout the day and night is to ensure that your life does not lapse into becoming, again, an unbroken continuity of utter bewilderment. The only way to prevent this is through the strategic and vigorous application of mindfulness and alertness. Especially, our text tells us at this point, you should continually review in your mind what will occur during the 3 other bardos, the bardo of the time of death, and so forth, and by reviewing these, become progressively more and more familiar with them. I'm going to stop there for this afternoon, but if there's anything you are unsure about or any other questions you would like to ask, please go ahead.
Hello, Rinpoche. Recently I was taking care of a friend that was dying. She was a very powerful practitioner, very, very intelligent, and had done all the practices that Thrangu Rinpoche had ever given her with great commitment. Toward the end of her life, we practiced Chud together all the time. To my shock, she had a great eruption of klesha activity that she couldn't seem to deal with. I didn't know what was going on. Actually, the only thing I could think to do was to continually practice with her and help her hold her mind in the chud and to love her no matter how awful she was behaving. I couldn't understand why, given that she was so powerful and so devoted as a practitioner and a very good teacher, that this should happen to her and that she couldn't deal with it as her death approached.
Mahamudra Rinpoche, Thrangu Rinpoche ga loma yempa chi, the Nyamlin sama zo tsawa yapo zo tsawa, the Nyamlin tempo dawa yepa ge me, ge gen chu ge yang yapo yempa chi ge, shi renka morong ge shepchi dawa shobare. Shepchi shobe kapsu dene, shi gen ge aja de shi renka kasa nyomo pe barso. The ngoma ge semna tes rangwan dawa yanang, shi renka de la rangwan sane mepa dang. Tene be control me barwa dawa the morang alam de matopa dawa chi chasons. De control nyam de che bon potan sons. Che mo potan sons. Che dana de sheda pe ma son morang pe me control dawa da nyomo pe me pasons. De kandare nyamlen de sam yapo yapa chela de sam ke shiren ke kasa nyomo lama de kares.
Tachitanga, Yamni Yapo, Yankinke, Yena, Tenitela, Mahumpala, ta chedu tre kanchela zabzab gupi kulmandabo nang ki chetla kahi tinde chung loji do yore ben patu rumbache gumba zodi tel tene ta habo takna
So sense.
so habo taga kanche gure tanga nyawala sondole kanche gure ngoni ko nyawala sungo mare ko la tende kangal yo mare te ta ina ya mahompala loma ta chunyo lensi ken kangala zaza gupi kumana ya ge seto ta tende nang ze tale se tende sungyo la te tenda boche chula kumasi ken da ina kanche tende da intira.
She may have been doing it for your benefit. Rinpoche said that there are a lot of recorded instances of stable practitioners behaving strangely at the time of their death. And the most famous of these was Paltu Rinpoche, who at the time of his death appeared to fall into an utter panic and started to shout to everyone around him, "Oh, I'm dying, I'm going to go to hell, I'm going to hell, what can I do?" Well, obviously, we have to take Paltu Rinpoche's assertion that he was going to hell with a grain of salt. Because if anyone isn't going to hell, it was him. He was doing it in order to cause those around him to take death seriously. And so it's quite possible, Rinpoche said, that your friend was trying to get you to take death seriously.
Well, that's interesting because after her death, she was around quite a lot, very vividly. And there were visions that were associated with Black Vajrayogini. That was her manifestation that I associated with her.
Morong shitsane dene de shitsawa de yanda tongsong segdo da de that morange shepchi shoken dege de migyo de shits de chikshu shitsane de shitsawa de yanda toksong segdo tokne yang trauma namo yang toksong and morange nyamlen de trauma namo re segdo pamo namo Sounds good.
Well, there was a slathering pig's head with it. That surprised me, but it wasn't scary. It was really, actually great. And she threw things around the room after her death, too.
Pakshal pe jigsu rongwa daw yore ni ji trap dong ma sons. Dene yang dene chikshu de shitsawa kaso dene kangba ke chala patsu mombo de yoson segedo ta kayena chotro yena kayena de morang de chala kangba nala chala yorwa patsu pongzong segedo
Tukasi.
sare morang mare shitsawa de chikshu de pongzong
Yeah. Pati morang lan tong dan daman dan jau truma nomon ja tipe morang ya puin jiraya.
Well, it sounds like you're doing pretty good too if you see all this kind of stuff.
Well, she and I both understood each other at the level of Black Vajrayogini and Tramanakma. We really understood each other well there.
Konso ni la delwa de trema nambo ke nyamlen to ne delwa pe zombo yore se good.
Yeah. Ya bucho.
Good.
Ya bude.
Thank you very much, Rinpoche.
Rinpoche, when I sit down to practice, just listening to the description of all the different practices we're supposed to do, I sometimes feel overwhelmed with so many things to do and so little time. And how do I find the right balance amongst all the different practices?
Tata nyamlen ke rempa mombo yapa do mitse tungu yempa samlo tone dene yang sempa trogende. Sempa counter sena da nyamlen mombo zogo do tse mombo mendo dene central da long yores.
Yeah.
Dela tsu zemba da kanda zingi.
Tatela cha misal ke chen zambasi misal mena ya ta kora kase tutuji nyamlin siena tang te ngaranzo tanga nyamlin chepa yi sambanda buti chona tipe ya pura.
Rather than attempting to find some amount or some criterion, it's better, Rinpoche said, if you simply practice as much as you can and be content with the fact, knowing that you're doing what you can do.
Well, I'm still thinking about trying to balance tranquility with visualization, the amount of time to spend and I mean, it's not like I have to know the amount of minutes, but within an hour's period of time, I don't know, I guess try to get the right proportion or not feel too scattered, I guess.
Data ke nyamlen so pena la gomjo dong shine gomjo la so pa ke data de nyamlen ke to the chago ko dos pena de shine mama gomna yana la mama gomna yana de tso ke ke jare to
Honde tate tusi ding rang so so ke nyamla tagi sena te semla nesha hiro mendu namdo mambo thogendo somna hinite te gom 망치 제나 되게 산 내자 연거라 산은 내자 오 진도 som나 되게 화감네 되네 야 화감 부투지 때 라인치 제나 되게 보나지 연거라.
You should determine that based on your own experience and the state of mind. If you find that your mind lacks tranquility, then you should put more time into tranquility meditation. If you find that you have a fairly stable mind, then you should put more time into the visualization practice.
And then when to do the insight meditation.
되네 되게 이런 데라 감네 딘적다나 되네 대체 방통도 감네
Well, it's good to practice insight meditation at the conclusion of a session of Yidam practice.
Thank you very much.
되네 다른 대점시나
We could stop with that.
좋아요네요 산이 들어가.
You'll have more time for questions tomorrow afternoon.
and